Posted that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition in the Spotlight. This is really a special treat tonight because we got two guests. They are part of a long tradition Derby, the class of 1964, which is going to have their 60th reunion October 19th, and we're going to talk a lot about that. We have Bonnie Berman and we have Jack Walsh, both members of the class of 1964. And I want to thank you both for coming on today. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Pleasure being here, Mike.
So
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So the first thing I would ask you both, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I was told when the incoming freshman class came to Derby High, the enrollment was so big that they had to have the freshmen start school at noon. Is that accurate?
It didn't start with our class. It came later.
It came, during our sophomore year. We were the last class not to have to do that.
Right. And, interestingly enough, Bonnie and I were just talking about this off the air. Your class was really the last class to go to the old Irvin school, correct?
Yes, our class, some of our class were at the old Irving school until we were in second grade. And then we moved to what was then called the new Irving school.
Right. And it's just hard to believe. I mean, let me ask you, Jack, you have a lot of history with Derby and, you do a lot of different things with the historical side of it. I mean, how many reunions has the class had since graduation? I know there was a 25th back in, 1989?
Yeah.
Yes.
25th, we had a 40th, and we had a 50th, and there was at least one before that, right, Bernie? Bonnie?
Yes, there was one before
10th?
that.
Yeah.
Right. So, Bonnie, tell me a little bit about entering Derby High as a freshman. I mean, what was the experience like? Obviously, you're nervous when you enter high school. You get past that quick, but there are a little nerves. But just talk to me about what the experience was like, maybe the first few months as a freshman at Derby High.
Well, Mike, my experience was somewhat unique. I lived right across the street from the high school in the White House that faced the high school. So all I had to do was walk across the street. It was very exciting. I'd heard a lot from my father, who was a Derby High School graduate, as if what was there was very much like what he was experiencing when he was at Derby High School, which was certainly not true. It was the first time that we were changing classes. We were meeting other students from Lincoln, from Franklin.
Right.
It was that St. Mary's and St. Michael's both existed separately at the time. So we were meeting a lot of new people, and there was a lot of mixing and getting to know people, because our classes were suddenly so much larger.
Right. And Jack, who was the principal at the time when you entered your freshman year?
Mr. Heffernan. You would better know him as the father of Dan Heffernan.
Right.
Football coach in Seymour. He was a great guy. He was our principal our first 3 years, and then Martin Cromick took over our senior year.
Right. And I know back then too, Derby, I don't want to say a dress code, but you did, if the boys had to wear a tie and the girls had to wear dresses, correct?
The girls could not wear pants.
Right.
That was a very big issue for Mr. Cromick. And he did not like girls dyeing their hair. He actually, if you colored your hair, you were sent home. And I remember that was a very big issue. He was very strict about the dress code, and there was a lot of reaction to the dress code.
Yeah.
I believe Derby was the last high school in the Valley to drop the dress code on Walden. Derby had a reputation for more discipline than other schools, and we did have to wear ties all 4 years. And if you didn't have one, they had a supply in the principal's office, so you weren't getting away with it by saying I left it home.
Yeah. You know what I find? Yeah, go ahead.
The other controversy was that he owned a measuring tape. and he carried the measuring tape in his pocket. And if he saw a girl whose skirt was too short according to his standards, he would actually measure the skirt to see how short it was and react to that length.
I got a funny story about that, which I've told Bonnie. For another teacher who shall remain nameless to protect the innocent. But Mr. Cromick was very tough with that measuring stick and the girls. And I remember sitting in English class senior year, and all of a sudden the door opened. It was Mr. Cromick. He looked around. He made all the girls stand up, looked around. Luckily, he didn't measure any. He found that it was satisfactory, and he walked out. And again, the teacher, who remains nameless, watched through the window to make sure he was far enough away. And then he jokingly said, "All right, all the boys stand up right now." He was going to measure. Well, I don't know what he was going to measure, but unusual for a teacher to be making fun of the school principal.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I thought was really fascinating as well is there were so many different clubs back then that Derby had as students. I did not realize Derby had a golf team back then, and because there were no girls' sports, they had what was it was called girls leader court or something like that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit, because those clubs, I mean, they had future teachers, which I thought was really cool. Which, that I would say probably in the 80s that disappeared, but that was pretty cool that they had these different clubs for these students.
And the clubs also gave us a chance to know the faculty in a different way, because each of the clubs had an advisor. And that person developed fairly personal relationships with the small groups of students that were in the club and counseled them. Were they really interested in this as a career? What did it involve? What could they look forward to? What schools they might consider? It really provided advising in a very kind of a casual way. Future nurses was very active.
And each of those clubs held events of their own too, fundraisers and whatnot.
And our class was the first year they had an astronomical society.
Oh,
yeah,
forgot about that.
Yes.
And
John Gagnon was.
Yeah, and I saw his name quite a bit in the superlative section. So sounds like he was a pretty popular student during
Mr. Science.
Yeah.
Mr. Science.
Yeah. I would also think, though, never mind just the high school, I would think like just living in the town of Derby back then had to be so exciting, because it seemed like Derby had everything. Everything was going on back then. I mean, there was so much that kids your age had access to, after school, summertime, stuff like that. I mean, all the different stores they had, hangouts and things like that. It just seemed like it was a great time to grow up in Derby.
It was. It absolutely was. In grammar school, we actually had a group that went bowling on Lower Main Street. There was a bowling alley, not an automatic. There was a guy that would set up the pins in the back, and our teachers took us there bowling once a month. That was 8th grade. And Derby was on Friday night. Stores were open till 9 o'clock. It's hard to believe when you drive through Derby, but Derby had a Woolworths. Derby had a J.C. Penney. It was a very active business area, and it was fun. And of course, you can't leave out Vanetti's.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of little restaurants downtown. It was a lot of retail businesses downtown. That was all lost later on, and not just in Derby. That happened in a lot of small towns. But the businesses were still doing well. We didn't have supermarkets. You didn't have these large shopping malls. Those came in later, and unfortunately, those also spelled the death of those small businesses. It's sad, because they offered parking, and it was not enough parking, in the downtown area for that kind of thing. But it was a great place to grow up. It really was. I don't ever remember having a key to lock the doors of my house. Ever.
Which is just amazing. I mean, that in itself is hard to believe, but I do believe it. The other thing is, let me ask you both. You touched on it earlier, Bonnie, that you didn't meet some of your people that would be your friends later in life till high school. Did you both end up meeting people from high school that are still close friends today?
Yes. And I feel very, very fortunate that a handful of the people with whom I went to grammar school and high school, from kindergarten on, are still part of my life.
Right.
And it's with those people that you can share the memories that Jack was just talking about. We get into the nostalgia and we talk about how comfortable it was growing up in Derby. Our teachers were classmates of our parents. So we couldn't get away with very much because they would often say, if you don't, I'll tell your aunt, uncle, cousin. It was highly networked. It was a secure place to be. And
Yeah.
you felt supported. I think that was the most important thing. Whatever you did, there was a whole network of support.
Right.
And those friends are part of that supportive network to this day.
It's a generational thing that you don't get as much today because people move a lot more, and there's a housing shortage. But my father went to Derby High School too. Okay, it was a common thing. I'll bet at least 50% of our classmates had parents or grandparents that went to Derby High School. And keep in mind, we were also going through that transition. We were the baby boomers, so our class was the biggest in history to that point in time. We had close to 160. That's why they ended up building the new school. So lots of contacts. We were coming from a lot of different schools. Actually, I think we may have had more kids graduating from the Catholic schools at that point than from any of the individual public schools. My class at St. Mary's had over 80 kids in it. Okay?
Right.
Now, a lot of them didn't go to, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but some didn't go to the high school. But we also had probably 30 from St. Michael's, and then, the 3 public schools. So you're drawn from all over town too. So it was a good time. It really was.
And interestingly enough, there was no what you would call a junior high school. Like Derby years later would have the Derby Upper School. They kind of, shared it with the high school. But back then, if you went to Irvin or if you went to Bradley, wherever, you went there from kindergarten until you graduated 8th grade, correct?
That's right. It was from kindergarten right through 8th grade, which gave you a very long period of time to be part of the friends group. We were highly networked because we had spent years together. And there was very little coming and going in the group that moved from the old Irving school to the new Irving school. We did gain some people, I think, in 2nd grade, and I can think about exactly who they were. It included Jimmy Benanto. Jimmy Benanto joined us in 2nd grade.
Yeah.
But other than that, we were a very stable group. And I imagine Jack had the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. But, we did have one school that was not K through 8. Okay. We had the Hawthorne School, which was where Derby Neck Library is today. And that was an old wooden structure. I think they only went up to maybe 6th grade, Bonnie. And then
No, I think it was 4th.
4th? Okay. Yeah, I know
I think
it
it was
didn't
4th
go all the way, and they had to transfer to either Lincoln or Irving School. Most people don't even remember Hawthorne School.
I think they ended up going to Lincoln because it was closer to where they lived.
Right.
Right.
Of course, Lincoln is now a church. The old high school is senior housing. I was fortunate enough to be on the board of directors when that was converted to senior housing. And, that I felt pretty good that we were able to save the old high school, even though I had my doubts when they started talking about it because it was in such bad shape. But, that was a beautiful building. If you go by today and still look at the carvings over the door, I mean, it's they don't build it like that anymore. It was just a great place. And it was built in sections. Most people don't know that. It started with the old, I forget the name of the family's house.
It was the Cheeseman house.
Cheeseman, that's correct. And then it was built in sections. and the last section was over on the right-hand side. And Mike, you'll get a kick out of this. When we had to line up to go into school in the morning, one side of the building was for the girls, and the other side was for the boys, and there was no mixing. If you got caught in the middle, you were going to be in trouble. So I can't imagine anyone thinking that actually happened, but that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, but what I had always heard too, I've talked to people like Charlie DeCenzo, Bob Ahern, John D. Francisco, is the students always behaved. I mean, there was never problems with discipline or anything like that. I mean, it seemed like to me that the faculty had the respect of the students all the time, and it was just, a great school.
I don't think that acting out was a thing of our generation. Yes, we did it, but we respected the fact that we were in school, we were expected to behave, and it wasn't a conflict for anybody.
Right.
And, in defense of the kids today, we didn't face the same problems that they did.
Right.
You can't say there were no drugs when we were there, but really the only drug was alcohol, okay, which is a big problem by itself. But we didn't have any other drugs. Those came in basically within the 5-10 years after we graduated. That's when that started. So
right.
You didn't have as many outside bad influences as they have to deal with today.
Right.
Yeah, I think kids today have a much, much greater challenge than we had.
Right.
Much greater challenge.
Right. So talk to me a little bit. Obviously student council always plays a big part in high schools. To ask you, like, who were your officers freshman, sophomore, and junior year, that's a little unfair. But for the senior class, I mean, who was your president, your vice president, secretary, and all that?
Mike, Jack and I are both smiling. Jamie Cohn was our president for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And for a long time, we thought that he was the only person that ever did that. And years later, when I was doing some research, I discovered that I was wrong. That there was at least one, and I think there were 2 others that had done 4 years. But it's still highly unusual to have the same class president for 4 years. And of course, Jamie's still around, stayed in Derby, and made a big mark on the city of Derby.
And now, will he be attending the reunion, or?
He's actually on our committee, Mike.
Right.
Yes, he will be at the reunion.
Because I know, especially, I'll just use my class as an example. The president was always kind of in charge in organizing our reunion. I mean, was that the case when you had your first reunion, or was it more a committee like you have today?
Bonnie's going to have to answer that. This is my first time being on the committee.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Jamie was very much the person who would call a group together, and he knew pretty much who would do work and who would be bothered. He knew that. And so he would call upon those people to come forward and start calling people, deciding on a place, and, making the contacts that would bring people in.
Right. And it's funny too. Obviously now it's a lot easier, but when you did your first reunion, there was no social media, there was no Facebook or anything. So you really had to hope that their phone numbers were in the book, or information had their numbers. I mean, that's how you were able to get a hold of people if you didn't see them all the time. So it always amazes me, because everything got done back then without all this technology, when it seems like now, when you look at it today, you almost think it's impossible to do it that way.
Well, we actually just put a flyer in the mail to catch up with people with whom we have not been able to make contact. So we use the old-fashioned way as a follow-up.
Right.
But in those days, we sent out mailings. We were able to get people's addresses just by virtue of networking, because people would keep in touch with different groups. And we did well. We did well at pulling people into the reunions.
Right.
And talk about a change. Back then, you had phone books.
Yeah.
You can't find a phone book today. You can't find one, so you got to do a lot of research. But it is great when you make contact. I had a couple people follow up with me from the electronic stuff that we put out. People that I hadn't talked to in years. In fact, I had a great experience today. I happened to be up at the Ryan Field complex. I was out walking, and looked, and I said, "Geez, he looks familiar." And as I got closer, it was another one of our classmates from 1964, Jeff Martino. He used to live on 7th Street.
Yeah.
And, he moved away years ago. He's married. He spent some of his time in Guatemala and some of his time here. But just, I had emailed him and called an old address, got nothing. And 2 days later, there he is standing in front of me. What a small world.
Yeah, that is hard to believe. Talk to me about the first reunion that your class had. Did you both attend it, or?
I did.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the first one was.
Right. There was one back in I want to say around 2011. Was that your not most recent one, but wasn't there one around 2011 or 2010 that you had somewhere around there?
Was that the 40th?
No, I don't think it would be the 40th. No, because I think 2004 would be the 40th, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. I just saw something online and it was from 2011. I think it was something you had posted, Jack, but maybe it was an old photo that you posted from the year 2011. That might be what I'm thinking.
It probably was, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike, the other thing that allowed us in the earlier reunions to get in touch with people is that families still lived in Derby.
Yeah.
And we were able to use information about the family to reach out, and families would put us in touch with classmates.
Right. And now how many do you know the number offhand? How many were in the graduating class of 64?
I think it was 162.
Right.
Yeah. Which is, it's funny. I mean, people talk about some of the classes today and how there's only like 70 something in the graduating class, but 162 really isn't that big either. So I would be willing to bet that everybody that was in your class knew each other, because when you have 160 kids, they're all going to cross paths one way or another. It's not like Shelton where some of the kids don't know each other in the school.
Yeah, well, at the old Derby High School, you bumped into them every minute because the place was so small. I mean,
yeah,
you couldn't avoid that. It was good, and I think Derby probably peaked at about 200. I don't know if they ever got much above 200, and of course now it's gone the other way. But those things go in cycles. I mean, been doing research around from the original classes, which I think had about 15 in the graduating class, and then up through us 162. And again, I think it peaked at just about 200.
Right. So let's talk about this reunion. It's going to be on October 19th. And where is the venue at?
It's at a place called Bin 100.
Yeah.
It's right off the Route 1 in Milford, Lansdale Street. And we'll be having a luncheon that day from 1 to 4.
Wow. Yeah. And that'll be a lot of fun. I know you'll enjoy it. Now, do you guys do anything special at the reunions? I know you reminisce and stuff, but I mean, is there any like trivia for the class or anything like that, just to kind of make it fun for everybody?
I'm actually going to take that as a good suggestion.
We haven't gotten that far yet. We're so worried about tracking people down and getting invitations in their hands. So now we'll have to figure out the actual day.
Well, I can tell you this. I'm good friends with John DeFrancisco, and he swears up and down to me he's going to attend this. And I keep asking him because I've seen some of these pictures. I never see him in there. And I said to him, you've been a Derby guy your whole life. You coached everything. How come I don't see you on these reunion or in these reunion pictures? And he swears up and down, I'll be there this year. So I'm going to hold him to it. But who is exactly on the committee besides yourself and Jack?
Carol and Pepe and Jamie.
Oh, okay. So the four of you. And
Carol has always been very active.
Yeah. And I would think that it's got to be a lot of fun to plan these things. I mean, yeah, you got to do some work, but at the same time, it's not work when you're enjoying yourself. And this has got to be a lot of fun when you meet with each other and kind of discuss how you're going to do it. And then, you're going to see some classmates. And unfortunately, there's been some classmates that have passed away over the years. I think John DeBarberry was probably the most recent. So, I mean, that's always tough. But, I mean, it's got to be so cool to be able to see people that you grew up with, and then you get to like share stories, because that's really what you'll do at this reunion is you'll talk a little about the present, but a lot of it will be about the past.
You know,
Very,
and Mike, I think you see that if you go to Facebook or any of those, it's amazing how people who've moved away years ago, they have nothing but praise for
Yeah.
growing up in Derby and going to Derby High School. Okay, even if they had bad memories, they've forgotten that and they remember the good times.
Yeah.
We were fortunate again. We were very, very fortunate. You know, it's sad. I think our count, Bonnie, is we've lost about 40 of the 160, which is that's still pretty good at our age to have those numbers. But hopefully, we'll see a lot of those people on the 19th.
actually, Mike, the most recent of our class that we've lost is Charlie Roberts,
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
who was all state as a sophomore.
Right.
You know, it's interesting. Since she mentioned that, you know, Mike, we had 5 sets of twins in our freshman class, which you know today that would not be unusual because of you know for IVF and all that, but it was highly unusual. And I remember that day I was sitting in. We had study hall in the auditorium because we didn't have rooms for study halls, but in the auditorium, and I think it was I don't know it must have been Mr. Afferton walked in and tapped me on the shoulder. And of course, my brother was in there too. And I said, "Oh, what did I do wrong? I couldn't have done anything. I know I didn't do anything wrong." And instead, he was calling all the 5 sets of twins to go out and pose on the front page, on the front of the building. And the picture ended up in the Evening Sentinel and talking about this unusual circumstance of 5 sets of twins at Derby High School, which was unusual for the time.
Yeah, I mean that's a real cool story as well. And I mean the other thing that I was kind of doing some research today. You would not think that any of the faculty you had when you went to school, any of them would still be alive. But I do know one for sure that's still alive, and that's Ray Nauawag. I believe he taught English and Spanish back then. So I mean, you know, I was thinking about that too. Like if it'd be really cool if somebody could get him to come to the reunion, because I mean, he may be, now I may be wrong, but he might be the only living teacher.
No, I know of at least one more, Mr. Donovan, who taught biology.
Oh yeah, you forget about him because he was the principal at Bradley for so long. You forget that he did teach at Derby High. But
and I believe Mike, Mrs. Johns is still alive. Eleanor right. Johns.
Right. And, you know, I think about that faculty, too. Even when some of them were, quote unquote, tough teachers, they had a lot of respect of the students. You know, anytime I heard about Mrs. Dempsey, I heard she was tough, but she was also somebody that kids said they learned a lot about. You know, she was a great teacher. So, I mean, you talk about these teachers, it seemed like to me, they all like gave that class and classes before and after their very best, because these kids, you never hear kids from the 60s and 70s ever really talk negative about any of that faculty.
I think, Mike, we were very, very fortunate. We had they were characters, no doubt, but they were very committed to teaching. And we talk often about Miss DeLessio, who taught Latin.
Right.
She was a character, but she really helped people to learn. Mr. DeFrancisco was a character, needless to say, but English too. Nobody left there without learning. Mr. Vitello, you can't talk about Derby High School without talking about Alphonse Vitello. We had some good people, and they were interested in their students. They cared, and we felt that caring.
Right. And many of them were not only graduates of Derby High School, but they still lived in Derby. Mr. Koss walked to school every day.
Wow.
Okay. When would you walk to school every day?
That's a great story. It really sounds like to me, and again, I go by when I talk to Jack, when I talk to John D, you know, Jimmy Benanto, it really seems like to me, though, this was a real tight group, this class of 64. And I mean, I think that's the thing that's really what makes this event so outstanding and awesome is that this class really, they were friends. They weren't just classmates. They really were friends with each other. And I think that's why it's important if you could get people together to have reunions like this. I really think it's a great thing.
It gives you a chance to relive some of the happier moments of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the sharing of stories and the smiles are just incredible.
And I know you're still in the process of sending out more invites, but have you gotten some confirmations of people that are going to attend already?
Yeah, several. Now we're just waiting for the checks to show up. And Caroline will have to handle all of that. But yeah, even the people who have responded that they can't come, they're really disappointed that they can't make it, whether it be for health reasons or travel too far or other things already scheduled. The thing you always get is, boy, I really wish I could come. I have so many people that I want to see, and it doesn't always work to pick one day.
We have someone coming all the way from Mesa, Arizona for the reunion.
That's awesome. That really is cool.
So far, that's the longest distance.
Right. Now, is there going to be like a program of the event, like a booklet and stuff like that? Has that been something in the works or anything like that? Or is it just going to be a casual lunch that day?
So far, it's casual, but, it would be nice if we could collect information. As we did once before, everyone filled out a questionnaire, and if we could then publish that to all the members later on for those who couldn't be here, and even those who were there, to find out where did people go, what did they do, even though an awful lot of them are still in this area.
Right. And let me ask you, Jack, I thought about this earlier today. Over the years, you've had some really neat reel-to-reels that you saved from softball games you played, flag football and stuff. Are there any old reels of the class during their years in high school, like the graduation or anything like that? Because I know the class of 65, there's one on YouTube that's been there for years. It shows the class of 65 marching for their graduation.
Oh, I'd love to see that. I can't recall any. People just didn't have cameras the way they do today. I mean, Actually, everybody's got a camera now. Everybody has a camcorder because it's right on their phone. That's the one advantage future classes will always have, because you really have to go to the archives to find anything.
Right.
We have pictures of the graduation, but we don't have any films.
Right. But that's something cool too. If you have pictures and stuff, you could always show a slideshow of that stuff. And I think it's really, you'll see so many classmates too. They'll be in awe of watching when they were still kids, because I mean, you never forget how you look like when you're in high school or when you're a kid. You realize you get older looking, but you kind of always think to yourself, that's how you look. And it's really neat to be able to see those old pictures, because that stuff's really cool. Looking at the yearbook and stuff, I thought that 64 yearbook, whoever was in charge of it, that person did a tremendous job, because that yearbook had everything in it.
Well, we lived in interesting times. The theme of the yearbook was the World's Fair. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing a lot of people posting pictures from the World's Fair, and thinking back, we were lucky. We were able to go to that. It was a different time. Keep in mind, we went from the oldest elected president of the United States to the youngest elected president of the United States in our freshman year.
And that's something too I wanted to bring up to you too.
I was going to say that's the negative event of our high school years.
Yeah, because that happened senior year. Yeah.
Yes, and I remember exactly. I had gone for a college interview. I was driving on 95 for the very first time when it came across the radio. And it was something that hit our class very, very hard, especially because many of us had been downtown Derby when he came through in a motorcade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He came through twice, once as president and once when he was running. He spoke from the steps of the Sterling Opera House a couple of days before the election on his way to Waterbury about 1 o'clock in the morning in the rain. There were still people out there who could tell you they remember it. I remember standing on Main Street when he did come through as president, which wasn't that long before the Cuban Missile Crisis. I can't forget which, but and he was as big as life. They always say that there are certain people that just have an aura around them. He did. It was something special. Plus, again, the generational shift that it represented, as he remarked in his inaugural address, and then to have it all die before he even completed first term, that was tragic. It really was. And it's one of those events you always remember where you were, just as Bonnie remembers where she was. I was actually
clearly
in the school because I was on I think it was the yearbook committee, and we were meeting afterwards, and Jamie Cohen came running in. I don't know where he had been, but he was in the building, and he came running in to say the president's been shot. I just remember dropping everything and running home and just getting in the door like 5 minutes before Walter Cronkite, made the announcements that he had died. It was just, time stood still for the next few days. Remarkable.
Yeah, really.
As you talk about it, I can still feel that tension. Just recalling that event brings it up.
Yeah.
Right. So before we go, how, for people listening, how can you purchase tickets? I'm sure there's a Facebook site, but how do you go about purchasing tickets if you want to attend this reunion?
Well, first of all, it's posted on Facebook.
Yeah.
Jack posted it in a number of places. He's very talented in that way, so that there are a number of sites that people can go to or may be familiar with that'll give them all the information about how to reach out to members of the committee.
Right. Well, I think it's a great thing that all of you are doing. It looks like to me the participation is going to be what it always is. You're going to get a great turnout. And I really do hope that you have a wonderful time at that event because, listen, you got to give yourselves a round of applause. To have a 60th reunion and to be able to organize it and things like that, that's just a phenomenal job by everybody. So congratulations on 60 years out of high school.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the 75th.
Well, I thank you both for giving me some time. Again, folks, it's Saturday, October 19th, 1 to 4. And what's the place called again, Bonnie?
BIN 100, BIN 100.
BIN 100. So there's a ton of information on Facebook. Obviously, you could reach out to Jack. You could reach out to Bonnie, the other committee members. But it's going to be a great event. And I would just end this with this. Congratulations to the class of 64. You all should be very proud of yourselves. So thank you both again for giving me some time.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, for having us.
Thank you, Jack.
We
Thanks,
appreciate
Bonnie.
it.
That was in the spotlight. That was Jack Walsh. That was Bonnie Berman, two members of the class of 64. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.